Your brain can trigger stress without there being any immediate danger. One of the most important things about the stress response is that it doesn't require a physical threat. Your brain can respond to something being uncertain, unpredictable, difficult to control, or socially important, and begin preparing your body for action. That makes sense when the problem is obvious. A car suddenly moves toward you. Your brain doesn't need a meeting about it. It detects the threat. Your sympathetic nervous system activates, adrenaline increases arousal, and your body becomes ready to respond. But now consider a much more ordinary situation. You open your inbox and see, can we talk? Nothing has happened yet. You don't know what the person wants, but suddenly you're thinking about it. Maybe it's bad news. Maybe you've made a mistake. Maybe there's a problem you need to fix. The email hasn't actually created a problem yet. Uncertainty did. And this is one reason modern stress can be so difficult to notice. Your brain doesn't only react to things that are happening, it also reacts to what might happen. That means the modern version of a stressor can be remarkably small. A notification, a message, a deadline approaching, a bank balance, a difficult conversation tomorrow, a headline about something you can't control. Each one can create a small demand for your attention, and then another arrives, and another. You might not experience any one of them as a major stressful event, but your brain keeps being asked to evaluate something new. What does this mean? Do I need to respond? Is something wrong? What happens next? That constant evaluation is part of what makes modern stress feel different. The old emergency was obvious. Modern stress can be ambiguous, and ambiguity is difficult to put down because there is no clear moment when the brain can say, done, nothing else to figure out. So instead of asking only, am I stressed? Start asking, what keeps creating the next thing I need to deal with? Because once you see the source, you can change the environment around your brain. Maybe that means fewer notifications. Maybe it means checking email at specific times instead of allowing every message to become an interruption. Maybe it means removing a social media feed that reliably leaves you tense. The point isn't to become fragile enough that nothing can bother you. Stop asking your nervous system to react to things that don't deserve a reaction. Your stress can continue long after the stressor is gone. Research shows that repetitive worry and rumination can delay recovery from a stressful event. That means the event doesn't necessarily have to continue for the stress to continue. And you've probably experienced this without giving it a name. Someone says something to you at work. The conversation lasts 3 minutes, you walk away, but 3 hours later you're still having the conversation in your head. You think of a better response. Then another. You wonder what they really meant. Then you imagine what might happen next. The person isn't there anymore. The conversation isn't happening anymore. But your brain is still processing a representation of it. And this is where rumination becomes different from useful thinking. If the thought leads somewhere, it can help. You realize you need to clarify something. You decide to apologize. You make a plan. You learn something. There is movement. But sometimes the mind keeps asking the same question without producing a new answer. And that can keep your body in a stressed state for longer. In experiments, people who kept replaying a stressful event in their minds took longer to physically calm down than people who deliberately shifted their attention away from it. Think about what that means over a normal week. A stressful meeting in the morning, a difficult conversation in the afternoon, a financial worry at night. The original events may be short, but if your mind keeps reopening them, the physiological cost can stretch beyond the events themselves. And suddenly you have a strange situation. Your day contains several stressful events, but your brain keeps extending each one. That's why telling yourself to stop overthinking usually isn't very useful. The better question is, what is this thought trying to accomplish? If it is trying to make you take an action, find the action. If you need to send the message, send it. If you need information, get it. If you made a mistake, decide what you can repair. But if you've already done everything you can and you're still replaying the same scene, more thinking isn't necessarily more problem solving. It may simply be more activation. So don't fight the thought. Finish its job. If there is an action, take it. If there isn't, stop reopening the case. Write down anything that genuinely needs attention. Decide when you will deal with it. And then let the problem leave your working memory for now. You're not pretending the problem doesn't exist. You're giving your brain a boundary between something that needs solving and something that has already been solved. Chronic stress can make the brain less effective at solving problems. Prolonged stress can impair executive functions that depend heavily on the prefrontal cortex, including working memory, attention, response inhibition, and cognitive flexibility. That sounds technical, But the everyday consequence is surprisingly simple. The abilities you need most when life becomes complicated are some of the abilities that chronic stress can interfere with. Planning, holding several pieces of information in mind, ignoring distractions, changing strategy, controlling an impulse, thinking beyond the immediate moment. Now imagine you're already under pressure. You have 6 things to finish. One of them is important but difficult. You sit down to work on it, and suddenly your brain starts looking for something easier. You check your email, then your phone. You answer a message. You tidy something. You make coffee. You feel busy. But the important problem hasn't moved. This can look like laziness from the outside. It can even feel like laziness from the inside. But there is another possibility. Your brain is overloaded, and immediate, easy actions are becoming more attractive than a complicated problem that requires sustained control. Chronic stress can push cognition away from slower, effortful control toward faster and more habitual responses. And now the practical implication is much more specific. When you're already stressed, don't make yourself hold the entire problem in your head. That's exactly what is becoming difficult. Take your finances. You know something needs fixing, but you don't know exactly how much you owe, what needs paying first, or where your money is going. So your brain sees one enormous undefined problem and looks for an easier task. You check your phone. You do something else. You tell yourself you'll deal with it tomorrow. But now the problem is still unresolved, so it can trigger the same stress the next time you think about it. The first step isn't to solve the entire financial problem. It's to remove the uncertainty that makes it feel enormous. Open the account. Write down what's due, what's urgent, and what can wait. Now you haven't magically fixed your finances. You've changed the problem from "something is terribly wrong with my money" to "these are the 3 things I need to deal with." That's a much smaller cognitive demand. And the same principle works with work. Don't hold, "I have to finish this whole project." Define what has to happen next. Because when stress makes a problem harder to organize, the answer isn't always more discipline. Sometimes the answer is giving the brain less to organize at once. Stress is not what wears you down. Repeated activation without recovery is. The stress response is an adaptive process. It becomes costly when the systems involved in adaptation are activated repeatedly or remain active without adequate recovery. This idea is central to what neuroscientist Bruce McEwen described as allostatic load, the cumulative physiological burden of repeated adaptation. And this changes something important about how we normally talk about stress. Stress itself isn't a mistake. Your body needs it. If something difficult happens, you need your heart, metabolism, attention, and hormonal systems to adjust. You don't want a body that stays perfectly calm when something genuinely demands action. The problem is what happens when there is never a proper return toward baseline. Think about a normal evening. You finish work, your laptop closes, but your phone comes out. You answer messages, you check the news, you watch something stressful, you think about tomorrow, then you get into bed and start replaying everything you didn't finish. Technically, you haven't been working for hours, but your brain has been receiving information, evaluating problems, and anticipating what comes next. You stopped the task. You didn't necessarily stop the demand. And that's why "I took a break" doesn't always mean "I recovered." Recovery needs a change in the conditions that were keeping you activated. This is also where sleep becomes important. Stress and sleep influence one another, and inadequate sleep can increase physiological stress reactivity, creating an unpleasant feedback loop. So if you're already carrying a high level of stress, sacrificing sleep to squeeze more work into the day isn't simply taking time from tomorrow. It can make tomorrow's stress response easier to trigger. This is why recovery shouldn't be treated as a reward for finishing everything. You will never finish everything. There will always be another email, another deadline, another problem. Recovery has to exist while life is still unfinished. So give your brain a clear transition. Before leaving work, write down what is unfinished and decide when you'll return to it. Then close the loop physically. Leave the workspace. Go outside. Exercise. Talk to someone. Do something that isn't asking you to solve, check, respond, or anticipate. The point isn't simply to relax. You're changing the information reaching your brain. During work, the message is, "There are things I need to deal with." During recovery, that message needs to become, "Nothing needs my response right now." That distinction matters because a break filled with emails and alarming headlines is still feeding the same attentional demands. Recovery begins when your brain gets fewer reasons to stay on alert. The most effective stress intervention may be changing the stressor. Stress regulation can change how your brain and body respond to a demand. But sometimes the most direct way to reduce recurring stress is to change the demand itself. This sounds almost too obvious, but notice how often we do the opposite. A person has a workload that is permanently unreasonable. They learn meditation. A person spends an hour every night consuming upsetting information. They learn breathing exercises. A person keeps receiving notifications all day. They practice concentration. These things may help, but they are addressing the response while leaving the trigger untouched. And sometimes that's necessary. You can't remove every difficult situation. You can't control another person's behavior. You can't make uncertainty disappear. But there is a difference between a stressor you cannot control and a stressor you have simply become accustomed to tolerating. That distinction is worth investigating. If a particular app consistently makes you anxious, removing it changes the input. If checking work messages at night keeps your mind active, changing when you are reachable changes the input. If a recurring conflict is creating stress, a boundary may change the situation more effectively than trying to become emotionally numb to it. If a workload is genuinely impossible, the answer may involve renegotiating the workload, changing priorities, or asking for help. The important question becomes, am I trying to regulate a reaction to something I could actually change? Because if the answer is yes, you have another option. You don't always have to become better at tolerating the fire. Sometimes you can stop standing next to it. So take one recurring stressor from your week, not your entire life, just one, and don't immediately ask how to cope with it. First ask, what exactly is creating the stress? Maybe it's the notifications, maybe it's the uncertainty, maybe it's the workload, maybe it's a particular interaction, maybe it's the fact that you never know when you're supposed to be available. Now you can intervene at the right level. If you can remove it, remove it. If you can't, reduce your exposure. If you can't reduce it, change the boundary or the way you interact with it. And if none of those are possible, then regulation becomes the tool you need. Because there is no point spending all your energy learning how to tolerate a stressor that you could simply reduce. Sometimes the healthiest response to stress isn't calming yourself down, it's changing what your brain keeps having to react to. You're more stressed than ever. Let's change that. Stress was never designed to make you feel calm all the time. It was designed to make you adapt when something matters. Your brain detects a demand. Your body mobilizes. You respond. And when the demand is over, the systems involved can gradually settle again. The problem is that modern life is exceptionally good at creating demands without clear endings. An email creates uncertainty. A notification interrupts your attention. A difficult conversation follows you home through rumination. An unfinished task sits in your working memory. A stressful day interferes with sleep. Then poor recovery makes the next day's stress easier to trigger. And suddenly stress isn't one event anymore. It's a background process. That's why the solution isn't to build a life where nothing difficult happens. You would have to stop being human for that. The better goal is to become more precise about where your stress is coming from and what keeps it alive. Sometimes the answer is reducing unnecessary demands. Sometimes it's finishing the thought instead of replaying it. Sometimes it's making the problem smaller so your prefrontal cortex can actually work with it. Sometimes it's protecting the recovery that your physiology needs. And sometimes it's changing the thing you've been trying to tolerate. Because being stressed doesn't always mean that you're weak. Sometimes it means your biology is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The more important question is, does your brain know when the danger is over? If the answer is rarely, that's where the change begins. You're not trying to eliminate stress. You're teaching your life to have an ending after the stress.